Welcome into the PFF podcast. Steve Palazzolo here, along with Sam Monson. We apologize. We tried to give you guys a little heads up last week. We're a little bit late this week with your Week 16 review due to Christmas falling on a Monday. We hope you guys all enjoyed your holiday if you were celebrating. And Sam, I want to know, how was your first Christmas here in America?
Yeah, pretty good. Other than catching my first cold of the season, which kind of has been kicking my ass over the past few days. But other than that, pretty good. Yourself?
Yeah, we got a cold going around the entire family, which made for an interesting 16-plus hour drive from Cincinnati back to the New England area to spend some time with family. So it was good, though. We made it. We had a lot of fun seeing some friends and family, but it's back to talking football. All right, Sam, let's get right into the action. I don't want to spend the entire time going through the million playoff scenarios that we have here. I think we can, maybe dive into that a little bit on the preview podcast for Week 17. But a lot of action this weekend. I think one of the stories of the weekend, though, and the stories of the second half of the season now, is Jimmy Garoppolo, his emergence with the San Francisco 49ers. He remains undefeated. One more game to go into the offseason. Still undefeated for Jimmy G. But more so the way he did it, doing it against the Jaguars defense that has been among the league's best, if not the very best, and a Jaguars team that I think was falling into that category of you don't want to see them in the playoffs because of their defense, because of Blake Bortles potentially getting better over the last few weeks, and Jimmy G turns that all upside down with the Niners on Sunday.
This is crazy. Jimmy G looked really good this game. I think he looked a lot better this game than he did the week before, where he missed some throws. There was still a couple of misses in there this week, but, he took it to this Jaguars defense that we've been talking about being one of the best in the league. It was supposed to be his first real significant test, going up against this playoff-bound team, a team that was trying to prove they were for real for once. And he just went out there and stomped them. He put the 49ers ahead. The Jaguars helped him out in terms of giving the 49ers the ball back a few times, but he looked really good, completely in control of that offense. Early on, it looked like he was going to be under pressure throughout the entire day. As it turned out, the 49ers offense as a whole got the handle on that, and he was only pressured on 9 of 32 dropbacks, which is a pretty decent rate for an offensive line. So that kind of made things better, but he looked absolutely fantastic in this game and really destroyed the Jaguars. This was a game I don't think that was anywhere near as close as the final score suggested. Right at the end, the Jaguars got a couple of late touchdowns to actually turn this back into a contest. But, we were talking about garbage time maybe coming up with like 8 minutes to go. So I think it's really interesting for two reasons. One, the 49ers might genuinely have been a playoff team this year if you change nothing other than having Jimmy Garoppolo as their starting quarterback all the way through the season. And this is a couple of months after they were the worst team in the league. And two, the Jaguars just had a fairly significant blow to their Super Bowl aspirations dealt by the 49ers. We were talking about this team as the side you don't want to face going into the playoffs. The Blake Bortles being a different quarterback over the past 3 weeks, all of those things have suddenly changed. Suddenly the Jags kind of got their ass kicked a bit. Blake Bortles went back to being a bad quarterback, and the wheels kind of fell off a little bit, at least for one game.
So what's the bigger story here? Because I think that the fact that there are essentially two stories says a lot, because we were talking about the Jaguars defense as Seattle Southeast and that team that had that perfect mix of crazy defensive line pressure. I mentioned last week it seemed like they were getting pressure with multiple players on every play. We had our good friend Ben Stockwell, director of analysis, actually looked it up. They were third in the league, at least coming into this game, third in the league with the most pressures, most plays with multiple pressures from multiple players on the same play. That just wreaks havoc on opposing offenses. So we're talking about this defense that was championship caliber, and Blake Bortles, who over the last 4 weeks, by every statistical measure, was looking great. By PFF grade, was looking great. But we said, hey, can he maintain it? What happens if there's a shootout? What happens in this particular situation that did come up? And he wasn't great. 3 interceptions, garbage time touchdowns. It looked like 2015 Blake Bortles. So what's the bigger story, though? Is it that Bortles, hasn't really changed, and that his change is completely environment driven and it's just based off of games where the defense can keep them in control? Or is it the fact that the defense got torched and that was supposed to be their trump card going into the playoffs?
So I think the defense was still okay in this game, which sounds stupid when the 49ers put up 44 points on them. But it was the way in which it happened that I think, again, kind of not even just Jimmy Garoppolo, but it highlighted the Kyle Shanahan role in all this and just being able to out-scheme the opposition. And if anything, actually, that's my biggest concern about this. From a defensive point of view from the Jaguars, is that they kind of got out-schemed. The 49ers were able to get mismatches in the passing game by keeping the Jaguars in base defense and getting guys like Kyle Juszczyk, their fullback, lined up against guys like Paul Posluszny, their linebacker. Now, usually that's a standard matchup and it's nothing, but Kyle Juszczyk is one of those legitimate matchup weapons as a fullback. He's a guy that he's probably the only fullback in the league that is a genuine matchup advantage for the offense. So they were able to keep those guys in base defense the whole way, expose guys like Posluszny in coverage. Telvin Smith had a poor game in coverage, having had basically the season of his career year so far. AJ Bouye played pretty well in coverage, but was completely disinterested in as a run defender, missed 2 really bad tackles in run support, didn't really look like he was too interested in sticking his head in there against the 49ers running backs, and that was kind of exposed. I think generally, we've said this throughout the season, and Mike has definitely been on this before, the Jaguars' run fits on defense are pretty suspect. They're guys constantly jumping into the wrong gap, not quite working together in terms of when a defensive lineman slants inside, there's no linebacker coming over the top quickly to fill his gap. It's all just a little bit disjointed and chaotic, and the 49ers were able to exploit that really well. And I think that may come back to haunt them in the playoffs. If they don't figure that out, there are going to be teams capable of exploiting that. But overall, I think the defense will still be okay. The other side of the ball, I think, is more concerning because the Blake Bortles thing, that can't happen if this team is going to win in the postseason. They don't need him to be fantastic, but he can't be actively throwing the ball back to the opposition. That's just not going to wash.
The 2 interesting things that you said there, I think, are the fact that San Francisco used a fullback to create mismatches. That's a little relatable to what New England does. When you look at the teams that actually still use a fullback, New England does more than anyone, despite the fact that they're leading the league in passing yards. And then the Atlanta, San Francisco, Shanahan type scheme uses the fullback quite a bit. So if Jacksonville does have to run into New England, their ability to scheme is as good as anybody. So that I also think that would potentially be one of the best matchups. Before this week, I was thinking New England's offense versus Jacksonville defense. That is one of those matchups you just want to see head to head. Maybe it loses a little bit of luster after this game, but still a potentially good matchup. And then if Jacksonville does have to go up against Pittsburgh, even though they had their way with the Steelers earlier in the year, forced Roethlisberger into 5 picks, 2 of which were returned for touchdowns, Pittsburgh's offense still looks a lot better now than it did back then. So another potentially great matchup. So a lot to look forward to still in the AFC, but you lose a little bit of that luster because Jacksonville's defense had just been so suffocating all season.
You do. And the other thing about that is I don't think it needs to be a fullback to achieve that same issue. I think the thing is that the mismatches in that defense exist when they're forced to stay in base coverage,
right?
Or base defense rather. So the Patriots might not do it with a fullback; they might do it with extra tight ends where they're very strong, and it's the same problem. Suddenly you've got mismatches with tight ends on linebackers, and you get the same thing. I think there's a bunch of teams that will be in the playoffs that will be able to achieve that same look and expose what appears to be the Jags' biggest weakness is base linebackers in coverage.
Let's stay in the AFC and discuss the Kansas City Chiefs. As of right now, looking at playoff scenarios, it's pretty much locked in right now. Jacksonville, the number 3 seed, they'll represent the AFC South. The Kansas City Chiefs will represent the AFC West as the number 4 seed. Both of those teams will be hosting games week 1, wild card weekend, but Kansas City now goes from a team just a fascinating season for them. They're sitting near the top of the league. People are talking about them as the best team in the league for the first few weeks of the season and beyond. They hit a midseason lull, which absolutely coincided with Alex Smith, the quarterback's midseason lull. And now they're back. And they're back to the point where they've gone from potentially best team in the league to maybe they're not going to make the playoffs to, man, they look really dangerous because the offense is back on track and the defense is starting to figure things out after maybe looking a little bit lost for times during the season in their man coverage scheme and not having Eric Berry.
Yeah, they look good again. They look like the Kansas City that was playing in the first few weeks of the season. And I think I favor them over any potential wildcard team from the AFC. So that's the Ravens, the Titans, and the Bills are the three teams that are jostling for two positions. And the Chargers actually are still in there as well. So four teams, of which we're going to get two of them in the postseason. The Chiefs have definitely got the Chargers number by the looks of it, and I think I favor them over the other three teams as well, based on how they're strong. The one that would give me the most pause for concern is how they match up with the Ravens, purely because of Baltimore's ability to stop the run. And I think that is the area of Kansas City's offense that's still a little bit suspect. If you go up against a really stout run defense, that offensive line isn't as good as it looked really early on in the season. That will make life tougher for Kareem Hunt to get much going in the backfield. But really, it all comes down to that play of Alex Smith. And what we were saying, even through that lull, or even through, not even a lull, he was playing badly for a stretch. For about a month of the season, Alex Smith was playing some really poor stuff in the midst of that losing streak. And we were saying that, he is the biggest problem on this offense right now. But the glimmer of hope that was always there is that even though he was playing badly at that point, he was still playing aggressively. And that is the difference between Alex Smith this year and Alex Smith in any other season of his career, is that he is no longer this pathologically conservative quarterback. He is a guy that is taking the shot when it's there to be taken. And he's been doing that all the way through the season. And as long as he plays well enough at the stuff that he's always done, now you're in business. And even this past week, you see that he was taking aggressive shots down the field. When he sees his big weapons, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, he's doing it now even with guys like Albert Wilson. When he sees his weapons one-on-one on the outside, he's going to take a shot. And he's still being pretty good at hitting those. But just the willingness to take those shots is what makes him a different quarterback this year than he's been in the past.
Yeah, so if we look at Alex Smith big picture, let's almost forget for a second that those first 6 weeks he was like the number 2 graded quarterback in the NFL before, like you said, really struggling for a few weeks. If we look at this season big picture, currently an 85.9 overall PFF grade. That is the highest of his career. And we're talking about a guy who's usually about 80, 81, 82. He's in that range. The difference being this ability to drive the ball down the field when necessary, when those shots are there. He's still taking good care of the ball, and that was the thing I always said about Alex Smith. Even if he wasn't taking those shots, he's going to keep you in the game. And I do believe there's a reason why the old QB win-loss record, Sam, that a lot of people hate, that you hate, there's something to that ability to take care of the football, not turn it over, and at least keep your team in games. Smith has always had that. And if we look at it big picture and say, yeah, he's dropped off a little bit since he was, where he was earlier in the year, overall, he's taken strides forward. He's a better quarterback than he's been while still taking care of the ball. And if you told Kansas City that that's what they would get at the beginning of the season, they would sign up. They're all for it.
Yeah.
So currently number 7 in PFF grades. During that stretch, we did bring up the idea, what if this is the time to go to Patrick Mahomes? What if Alex Smith has completely lost it, lost all of that luster that he had early in the year? But he's good now. He's okay. And I think, again, you just look at it big picture and say, Alex Smith has taken a step forward this year. That has given Kansas City a chance, and a better chance than they had last year. My concern, I think, would be, do they have the same type of defense that can shut down good teams in the playoffs? I don't know if they can, but if you look at their numbers the last few weeks, they haven't given up over 20 points. They've given up over 20 points just once since week 7, and it was that random crazy game against the Jets. They lose 38-31. So they've gotten back a little bit. I'm sorry, twice since week 7. Dallas is in there as well. But they've kind of gone back to where they were defensively before, where the phrase I always used is just they make life difficult on opposing quarterbacks because they play so much man coverage. They make tight window throws, and then you make tight window throws, and then you have a guy like Marcus Peters who is just incredible at forcing turnovers, finding ways to pick passes off, force fumbles, and when he's at his best, he could be a game changer on the outside.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that this was Alex Smith's best game of the season. I mean, he was playing phenomenally earlier in the year, but this was the best game of his year against Miami, and it was better than even the numbers looked. He threw for over 300 yards, a passer rating of 96.5, but there was a deep touchdown to Albert Wilson that was dropped. Perfect deep pass in stride. Actually, an amazing throw. That should have been a huge boost to his numbers. Also, the Tyreek Hill freak sideline toe tap thing that was inexplicably ruled an incomplete pass. Again, that would have boosted his numbers. I think Alex Smith this past week was fantastic. The defense, I think, has a couple of sort of Alex Smiths of their own in terms of players that they need to be playing well for them to really be on stride. One of them is Marcus Peters. He needs to not have one of those terrible games where things just fall apart for him. I don't think he necessarily needs to be on fire, forcing turnovers or anything. And then the other guy is Justin Houston. They really do need at least one guy that's able to bring some kind of pressure, and Houston's their only real source of being able to do that at this point. He's gone missing at times this season. If they get, Marcus Peters playing pretty well, Justin Houston playing at his best, and Alex Smith playing well into the playoffs, this becomes a pretty terrifying team.
Yeah, I agree. So look, the AFC looked like this conference where nobody really wanted to get in, and it was a bunch of bad teams, and there's an element to that. But with New England, Pittsburgh, and Kansas City, they're all top end teams when they play at their best. Jacksonville still has that defense, and a team like Baltimore, if they get in with what their defense is capable of, I love what the NFC playoff picture is looking like as far as the matchups. But I think the AFC will be a little bit more interesting than people will think going in.
Now we need to talk, though, about how the Steelers just destroyed their own playoff hopes.
All right, let's do. This is the benefit of doing our review podcast on a Tuesday. We get to not break news because it's old news once you guys get it, but James Harrison, just before we got on the podcast, former Pittsburgh Steelers outside linebacker, has officially signed with the New England Patriots. Pretty predictable, Sam, right? He gets released after playing, 22 snaps all season?
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, he'll just go to New England, who needs pass rushers anyway. And here we are. New England picks up Harrison. He's 38 years old and just a house. What can he do? What can he do for New England down the stretch?
Well, first of all, don't shortchange him. The man has played, I think, 40 total snaps this season, not 22. You're almost cutting his workload in half.
40 total snaps. So some people would say he's been benched. I would look at him as being well rested.
Well, so the first point you made is, yes, it was incredibly predictable. I think I personally called it about 4 minutes after he was cut and about 30 seconds after I found out that he was cut. There's no way he doesn't go to the Patriots and comes back to destroy the Steelers in the AFC Championship game. It's too obvious. I don't understand Pittsburgh's attitude towards James Harrison, and I don't just mean this year. I mean for the last 7 seasons or whatever it is. They have been trying to move on from this guy for years, and they have this endless line of first-round draft pick edge rushers, and every single time that guy isn't as good as James Harrison, and they give him a shot to play better, and it never happens, and they end up having to go back to James Harrison again. This is a team that moved on from him. They did officially move on from him. Remember, he had that year in Cincinnati.
Right.
So they've already officially tried it once.
I blacked that out, though, Sam. That didn't really happen. They tried to make him a real linebacker in the middle. That didn't really happen, though, right? Cincinnati?
But the thing is, it kind of worked. He was a really good two-down run-stuffing thumper of a linebacker in a 4-3 system. That's how good a player he is. He could completely change systems and still be pretty good. So last year, I think, was just a more standard example of what we're seeing this year. They really didn't play him much last season. They went all the way through the season trying to give their their previous two first-round draft picks, Jarvis Jones and Bud Dupree, to let them carry the load. And then finally they kind of unleashed him midway through the season and realized he was their best edge rusher, put him in as a starter at week 11. He started the rest of the way. And in the playoffs, he was just ridiculous. If you include the week 16 game, which was a pretty important game for them as well, he had 5 pressures in that game, 6 defensive stops. The week after that, the wild card game, he had 7 total pressures, including 2 sacks and 8 defensive stops. The week after that game, 5 pressures, 3 stops. And then the AFC Championship game, he was a little bit absent, only had 1 pressure against the Patriots and 2 defensive stops. But for that 4-game stretch, he was by far their best defender and on an absolute tear. And now this season, everyone's going, well, he's obviously done because he's not playing. Well, maybe. Or maybe they're doing exactly the same thing again and just not playing the guy because they want to go somewhere else. And at least this time, to their credit, in TJ Watt, they appear to have found an outside linebacker that can rush the passer. But he has 1 game this season in which he has played 15 or more snaps, and he played 15 snaps against the Kansas City Chiefs back in week 6, 9 of which were pass rushes. And in those 9 pass rushes, he had a sack, a hit, and a hurry. So all evidence we have of James Harrison at this point suggests that he is still very capable of being a productive player in today's NFL. I would bet reasonable money that he is already the best pass rusher on the Patriots roster. And now he's got a reason to be pissed off at the Steelers and really show up if those two teams face in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that they were saving him up once again because, last year he didn't play a whole lot, but he had a bunch of games with, 7 pressures and 5 pressures. And like you said, week 16 against Baltimore, 5 pressures, and then in the playoffs, just unleashes other than that New England game where nobody really pressured Brady. So, there is this little bit of a track record of a, somewhat well-rested, aging guy that can leg press a fire truck just sitting there ready to go off. And it looked like, Pittsburgh was ready to do it again. There's also this chance that, like all old people, they lose a step, they lose it, and Pittsburgh's just been sitting there watching him, and he doesn't have it. But look, we see the small sample size. We've seen him play pretty well in games against Kansas City. You mentioned off air, he has Eric Fisher's number. Let's look at this differently. New England might play Kansas City in week 1 in the first round, going up against Eric Fisher at left tackle. Maybe that ends up becoming the matchup. Forget Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship. Maybe Harrison helps there. But
yeah,
New England's pass rush, they're a play contain first type of team, but they still don't have that guy that you could just unleash and let go nuts off the edge. Harrison could do that for 10 to 15 snaps, I think, at least as well as anybody they have, to your point.
This is a move where, for the Patriots, it makes complete and total sense. It's a complete shot to nothing. All the evidence we have suggests that when he's on the field, he's productive. And like you say, he will want to play well against the Steelers. He always plays well against the Chiefs, and that's 2 of the AFC teams that the Patriots are likely to face at some point in the playoffs. So for them, it just makes too much sense not to sign the guy. And from the Steelers' point of view, I just don't understand why you would release him. I mean, at the very minimum, you're putting out there a guy who could potentially come back to hurt you in the postseason when you don't need to. Why would you do that?
Well, he's a spy.
Oh, that's the other spy.
That's the other alternative. New England's been playing with headsets and deflating footballs and doing all this stuff through the years. Pittsburgh's going to send out spies. It's the only way to do it.
All right.
Hey, we'll see what happens. So James Harrison goes to New England. Sam, what else about Week 16? We talked about the Lions quite a bit this year. I think we all picked the Lions to beat the Bengals, who looked hapless the last few weeks, and the Bengals won, and the Lions are out.
It was kind of the most the most Lions thing possible. Is that all through the season, people have been complaining that we're not giving them the credit they deserve, and they're better than we suggest. And then just as we finally decide, well, at least they're going to beat the Bengals, who checked out 3 weeks ago. That one's for sure. Whatever about their playoff chances, then they just roll over and get beaten by Cincinnati. It was, that you couldn't really write that any better.
Yeah. So look, if you look at, I'm going big picture again here. If you look at the Lions the last couple of years, and a lot of people talking about Jim Caldwell being on the hot seat, Is there anything about the Lions roster that says they should be a playoff team, though? Is there anything there? I mean, Matthew Stafford's been a solid quarterback, but there's just not a lot of talent on the offensive line. There's not a ton of defensive line talent. I mean, they're weak in some very key spots. I would actually say they've done a good job the last 2 years. They've overachieved, and the roster needs help. That's how I view the Lions. That's why we've been low on them the last couple of years. It's not because we hate the Lions fans. It's not because we hate you. It's because your team's not that good.
Yeah, I mean, so they have been overachieving, I think, consistently. But there's definitely holes in this roster. The offensive line is not in good shape. They don't have a running game, at least partly, though. That's a sort of voluntary decision. But I just don't know that it's actually doing them that good. I think they would be better if they added at least the capability of establishing a running game, in the same way the Packers are a better team when they have a capable running game, regardless of how good Aaron Rodgers is at quarterback. I think this roster does have some holes, and that's why overall the grading and the analytics with the ELO system just doesn't love them. But I just think it was all too perfect that once we finally gave them credit for a guaranteed win, they went and laid an egg.
I do think that the best offensive teams, when you talk about balance on offense, it's not a 50-50 run pass split. It's not anything statistical. I just think it's the ability to adjust to different game scenarios. It's the ability to run the ball when you need to run the ball, whether it's to keep a lead or to just take advantage of a defense's weakness. It's the ability to throw short. It's the ability to throw at the intermediate and deep level. To me, that's balance. And I do agree that's where Detroit's been lacking, is that, when Stafford might not be on, when he's not playing like that awesome gunslinger, Matthew Stafford, every now and again he needs an easy game. He needs a game where the run game can just take a little bit of the pressure off, and he can just throw the ball 28, 30 times and still get a win. And they just don't have that as much as some other teams.
Yeah, the Patriots are the perfect example of that. They will have a game where they go, you know what, this is a game where we do it on the ground, and they hand the ball off 40 times, and they're fine with that. That's how they're going to win that game. And then the next game will be a game where they barely run the ball at all. It's all through Tom Brady's arm, and that's how they do it. The Lions seem to want to only do it through Matthew Stafford's arm, and I'm not sure they're capable of doing it another way. And I don't think Stafford is good enough for that to be your only answer. Like I say, even the Packers offense is better when Rodgers has the ground game that he can turn to if things, for whatever reason, aren't going quite as well as he wants them to. And Rodgers is a lot better than Matthew Stafford. So if even that offense is more formidable, when you can turn to another option when Rodgers is your quarterback, then I think the Lions need to have a better plan B.
Quick break to tell you that this episode is brought to you by PredictionMachine.com. Prediction Machine, a new generation in sports analytics where they play the game 50,000 times before they're actually played. Make better picks with proven data-driven analysis. Subscribe at PredictionMachine.com today and earn a $5 credit that can be used towards the purchase of any package. Easy for me to say, Sam.
Yeah.
We're all fighting these colds. We're all just trying to get through here. It's December football. We got to find a way to survive here. What else caught your eye this week? To me, Seattle was a key story. I don't know if there's anything else on top of that stood out to you and their ability to just stay alive. It was an elimination game between Seattle and Dallas.
It was, yeah, and I didn't expect the Seahawks to win that one. I thought it was going to be too much them going to Dallas with Zeke Elliott back, but no, they really they kind of stood up to be counted there. It went a little bit like we predicted in terms of the Seahawks offensive line was able to hold their own because Dallas are so strong on the edges. But what really screws that offense up is if you can get pressure right up the middle into Russell Wilson's face immediately, and that's where the Rams are so strong with Aaron Donald. So heading to Dallas, where they're strong in a different area, I think that offensive line was able to hold up better, and that was a big part of that. But yeah, the interesting storyline out of this game really is like the weird things that came out of it, the fallout, the Russell Wilson comment about needing to put the ball on Des Bryant's face, the Earl Thomas come and get
Dak's
me plea
comment,
thing.
Sam.
Sorry, damn it, that's the second time I've done that.
You said that on our pregame show.
I know,
or
yeah.
Pre-show. Yeah.
The Dax comment about needing to put the ball on Des Bryant's face, and the weird Earl Thomas come and get me plea to the Cowboys. Kind of bizarre game for post-match comments.
First off, so just to go back to the Dak comment, it was essentially something to the effect of, he left a pass a little bit behind Des Bryant, who drops it. He absolutely should have caught the football. It bounces up for an interception. Dak's had his interception luck reversed a lot these last few weeks. He's had some unlucky ones, and he made a comment saying, hey, maybe I should have put the ball on his face mask, essentially so he won't drop it. Now, I interpreted that not as throwing shade at Des Bryant. I interpreted that as a quarterback who is just being honest about his performance. And if you're being honest about your performance, when you're throwing that pass over the middle, you are supposed to put it on his face mask or on his front number. And he left it a little bit behind. You, and I think everyone else, took it as he's calling Des out for dropping the football. Is that right?
Well, here's the thing, right? Even if you mean it the way you took it as, he is clearly not dumb enough that he can't see the implication the other way of reading that. Like, the way that question is phrased, where they're trying to get you to go with that, which is what happened in this play. Now throw your wide receiver under the bus. You have to, at the very minimum, you have to be aware that this is where the reporter is trying to take it and what you need to say in order to diffuse that and say, drops happen, he's done plenty for blah, blah, whatever. There's plenty of ways out of that question other than, you're right, he dropped the ball, I have to put it on his face because that way he can't drop it. And if there's anywhere that knows exactly how hypocritical, I guess, that comment is over the course of this season, it's us who have been tracking the Des Bryant pass breakups on Dak passes that have been thrown directly to defenders. So, okay.
Does this count as a pass breakup? He tipped it to his team, to the defense.
So Des screwed this one up, but over the course of the season, he has bailed Dak out of a lot of bad passes that have been thrown right to cornerback. So I just think he deserves better than that comment.
So I think I'm right as well. Dak was trying to take the blame, saying I should have put the ball on his face mask. The problem was he kept talking and then said so that he won't drop it the next time. That's where he should have just stopped. Yeah. I need to put that throw on the face mask.
Next question.
Right. Let me just bring this up real quick. We talked about Jimmy Graham going to the Pro Bowl as this, atrocious move. Definitely not one of the best tight ends in the NFL and all this stuff. But I'm not saying he's a Pro Bowler. His addition in the red zone for a Seattle team that always seems to be, figuring out what to do in the red zone and throwing game-ending interceptions in the Super Bowl, and their inability to run the ball inside the 5 this year. Jimmy Graham just being that big, huge target that he should have been 2 years ago for Russell Wilson and just boxing out and catching fades all day for touchdowns. There's a ton of value there. And even if he's not this between the 20s tight end that some of the other guys around the league might be, I think this is an underrated part of what Seattle's doing this year. I don't always get caught up in touchdown numbers, but in this case, where Seattle lacks that one big red zone playmaker, they have no running game, a lot is on Russell Wilson's shoulders. I do think this Jimmy Graham red zone threat catches another touchdown, one catch, three yards for a touchdown, has been a huge part of this Seattle offense and kind of keeping them alive this year.
I will say that this matchup problem thing isn't going anywhere in terms of needing to find a way of covering guys like that one-on-one with somebody. Teams haven't figured out how to do it yet. I honestly think it might be the thing that catches up, unless it's James Harrison, the thing that catches up with the Steelers is that they seem to think that putting Sean Davis one-on-one with people is the way to cover them, and that's just never going to work. You're
saying unless it's the James Harrison spy move.
No, I'm saying unless James Harrison is the thing that catches up with them. I think Sean Davis being one-on-one with somebody in the postseason is going to catch up with him. We saw it was just an unmitigated disaster when they tried to have him one-on-one cover Gronk against the Patriots. I assume that they will go with a different plan if they meet them again and not do the same thing. But they ran him one-on-one this week, and he still can't cover guys one-on-one. I mean, that's their problem. The Cowboys didn't have anyone that could go one-on-one with Jimmy Graham. They tried to cover him with Jordan Lewis, who's just a corner, and not a big corner either. Right. Teams need to figure out how is best to cover a guy that is just bigger than your defensive backs and faster than your linebackers. It's a real issue. And I don't know that anybody has really kind of nailed the solution to that puzzle yet.
This feels like a whole offseason podcast, but to be honest, Dallas has a guy.
Yeah, Byron Jones.
So, but when Byron Jones goes up against Travis Kelce, he's overmatched. If he was going up against Jimmy Graham on the goal line, I'm not going to say he definitely gives up a touchdown, but he's still overmatched. And Byron Jones is like the prototype, right? He's 6'1", he's over 200 pounds. He has unbelievable agility to maybe even cover receivers if needed and to cover shiftier tight ends. And he's got the size to be physical. I don't know if there's a human that can do this. Is there one human? And I'm not saying you're going to lock down a Gronk or a Kelce or a Graham on the goal line and shut them out. There is this element of if you can hang tough with a guy and give up 4 catches for 36 or something like that. A couple of years ago, Aqib Talib did a great job against Jimmy Graham. 4 or 5 years ago, New England put him up against Graham one-on-one, and he did it. And Talib's just, your big, long corner. But there are not a lot of humans around the NFL that can truly match up with mismatched tight ends like Kelce, Gronk, and Graham. And if Seattle gets into the playoffs, I think this is a bigger story than people let on, because they're not hiding the fact that they're just feeding Graham on the goal line. They're like, hey, we got nothing else. We're just going to throw the ball to him, and you're going to have to figure out a way to stop it.
And the thing is, it's a different style of coverage than these guys are used to playing. So when you get a guy like Jordan Lewis, a cornerback by trade, I mean, he's used to playing the ball. He's used to trying to contest the catch at the catch point against guys that are, more or less his size. When you go up against Jimmy Graham, you can't do that because he has an extra 6 inches minimum of reach than you do. You just can't get to the point he can get to, at which point you have to forget about even trying to contest at the catch point, and you have to go 100% for making sure that, right, well, whatever happens, I'm not going to touch the ball, but I'm going to make sure he can't bring it in. So when the ball hits him, you have to just start swiping arms, and you have to go play the man rather than the ball at this point. And I think that's a difficult headspace for cornerbacks to get into unless you're kind of used to doing that anyway. And I think if you've got a player that is going to be able to do this, you need to just go with your most aggressive, physical, feisty corner and just send him out there and say, look, just try and rough him up and prevent him catching the ball. You may cause some flags over the course of that, but at least you're not actually going to cause the touchdown.
You could also just try to throw a snowball in his face if you have access to one.
Well, that's
underrated strategy.
That's from the Andy Benoit school of tactics.
Hey, just saying, it was a proposed way to shut down Odell Beckham, was it?
You need to actually be snowing for that to work, which is going to be a problem in domes, for example.
It's all about situational awareness, Sam. You gotta use the elements to your advantage. Let's fly through Week 16. Let's not call it word association, but let's discuss the team and you give me your thoughts. Minnesota Vikings 16-0 win against Green Bay. What's your takeaway there for Minnesota and their future?
All right, so I'm coming to the conclusion that Case Keenum is actually going to be okay. The wheels are not going to fall off the Case Keenum wagon. What's going to undo the Vikings is that their offensive line is going to fall apart in the playoffs.
They're just going to be wobbly wheels, but they're not going to fall off.
Well, the Case Keenum thing is going to be okay. I think Keenum's going to play fine. It's just that offensive line is going to go back to what it was last season, which is a disaster. The offensive line this year, it's never been good, but it's been good enough that it hasn't been a problem. Now they're getting banged up, and guys are going down hurt, and the backups are worse than the guys that are out there because they're the guys that were out there last year, by and large. And if they have to go too far into that bench, that offensive line is going to be bad enough that it's a problem. And at that point, Keenum isn't good enough to overcome a poor offensive line as well. He's only good enough to play fine, as long as the offensive line isn't an issue. So, yeah, I'm kind of scared for the Vikings that the offensive line is going to be their undoing unless they can get healthy quickly.
My analytics take on that game is I'm watching Case Keenum in this 10-degree weather, and he looked cold. He's bouncing around, and he's trying to stay warm. That's never a good sign for me. That's my analytical breakdown. Yeah, but you're the leader, man. You're the quarterback of the team. Act like you've been there before. I don't care if you played at Houston and you play in a dome in Minnesota and all this stuff. You just act like you've been there before.
Dude, it was single-digit weather out there. It was cold as
Playoff
crap.
weather.
The boss was out there in like a giant, what was it, a pilot's cap with fur in the inside of it. He's a pro. He's been there.
First off, Chris is stylish. Shout out to you, CC. And he's staying warm because he doesn't get to move around. He doesn't get to do that, moving around and throwing the football and scrambling, all that fun stuff.
I'm just saying, when the boss is in the booth with like a fur-lined deerstalker, it's okay for the quarterback to look a little bit chilly on the sideline.
I hope you're not hating on his style. Atlanta loses to the New Orleans Saints. They officially split in. It was a bit of a one-sided matchup, I think, as far as the score goes with New Orleans and Atlanta. But Atlanta had a ton of opportunities, goal line fumbles, and I mean, this offense is another one that just doesn't make sense to us on paper because they're able to move the ball. But the very difference, though, could just be that Shanahan effect where, in the course of 70 plays in a given game, maybe it's not a huge difference, but Shanahan had that knack for finding 5 that he could scheme open, whether it was a run, whether it was a pass, elevating Matt Ryan to MVP status last year. I mean, if we just sum up the Atlanta offense this year, I feel like that is the difference. It's a handful of plays a game, and that showed up again on Sunday against the Saints.
I think that's part of it. The other thing is, I think I can bring in this game, the Patriots game, the Chiefs game to an extent, a few games this week where this was, I think, league-wide the worst week for officiating I've seen since the replacement officials a few years ago. It was bad. It was bad in New Orleans' favor pretty consistently in this game. Yeah, this game consistently seemed to be every call was going in the way of the Saints. The Patriots conceded a touchdown to Kelvin Benjamin and the Bills that was overturned on replay for absolutely no good reason that I could see. I mean, I'm fully prepared.
That was one that had to just stay as a touchdown.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I'm fully prepared to admit that it was close, but there's no way you can overturn that on replay.
That play actually took 2 different camera angles and trying to say, okay, when did he get full control? And then another camera angle saying, when did he get his feet down? Like, it was so much work that it should have just been like, man, that's a pretty good effort. That's a touchdown.
The Tyreek Hill play that we talked about earlier, where it looks absolutely certain that he got both feet down, the ball absolutely didn't move. That stayed as an incomplete. There were a bunch of really, really bad calls this week that just it really did seem just like the worst week of officiating you will ever hope to see in the NFL, outside of the replacement officials again.
Yeah, so if you want to blame the refs, I'm just gonna chalk it up to the Saints are pretty good too, and Marshawn Lattimore with the butt pick. Is that what we're calling it?
The butt pick, yeah.
The butt interception. Matt Ryan's bad interception luck absolutely continues. He throws a pass, a perfect dig route right on his receiver's hands. It pops up into the air. And Marshawn Lattimore, who was beaten on the play, catches the ball with his butt for an interception. It lands on his butt for a pick.
Well, he did. It did get. He definitely did the majority of the heavy lifting with his butt in terms of the pick. But Marcus Williams deserves incredible plaudits for the assist, which is diving over the prone corpse of Marshawn Lattimore. He somehow managed to get a couple of hands to sort of keep it placed delicately between his buttocks so that Lattimore could then reach back around and corral it safely.
Was that him or someone else was trying to grab the ball off his butt and steal the pick?
I don't think he was. I think he was trying to reseat it back on his ass. I don't think he was trying to pick it off himself. I think he saw it was teetering on the brink and was about to fall to the ground, and he dives over him and tries to kind of swipe it back on top of the butt.
I don't know. We're going to have to go back and see what the tape says because, it was a fascinating play, but just another example of some poor interception luck for Matt Ryan this season. Saints, maybe the favorite in the NFC with just how well-rounded they are. Their ability to win with the pass game. We talked about balance earlier on the show. The win with the pass game, they can win with the run game, they can win on defense as well. Anything else, Sam? Let's wrap it up for week 16. I feel like our preview episode, that's the one you're going to want to listen to. That's the one we'll hit up every scenario. We'll get Mike Renner in there, I think. We'll see this week. We never really know. But we will go through all the scenarios, And at some point, we'll break down all of these playoff teams, their strengths, their weaknesses, but weaknesses especially, I feel, Sam, those show up in the playoffs. If you're weak, it's tough to hide it, and a lot of times that's the reason you get ousted. And I think there's a lot of weaknesses to highlight here around the NFL. A lot of imperfect teams, which is going to make for just a fascinating playoff picture, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. This season has been interesting, but for the last several weeks now, it's looked like the playoffs themselves are actually shaping up to be a really good season this year.
Yeah, I agree. There's been a lot of playoff previews the last few weeks. Minnesota's had some tough games against playoff teams, and the Rams have, gone through the gauntlet and they continue to come out shining. So it's just going to continue. Week 7, is it going to be lit, Sam? It might actually be lit.
Oh, stop doing that. Stop.
All right, we'll find out. We'll find out in the preview episode. One other programming note this week: we will combine the quarterback analysis with both Zach Robinson and myself with our mailbag, Sam. We'll combine that into one action-packed episode, and then we'll hit you guys up with the weekend preview this Friday for Week 17. All right, guys, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to get to ProFootballFocus.com. Check out Edge. Check out Elite. Promo code PFF10 is still good. Get $10 off any of those products. And we'll talk to you guys later in the week with our mailbag and quarterback analysis.